You mentioned when you first made your CV and you applied to a bunch of companies, having no success, and then you finally get a call from this guy saying, hey, listen, all of this is wrong. Let me help you just these couple of things. You're doing everything wrong. It's hard for me to imagine that a CV can be wrong, especially, you're applying to scientists,
Mhm.
and you also think, I'm also applying to some scientists. Maybe they work for a company, but they also have some kind of academic background. What were those things that were wrong in a CV that's maybe appropriate
Happy to
for
share that.
academia?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So I think the easiest way to explain it is from a mindset perspective and a purpose perspective. So a CV, it's literally your life story. It's everything you've ever done. And it's very me focused. It's here's what I've done. Here are my accomplishments. Here are paragraphs about what my impact on science was. Here are all the professional committee societies I've been a part of. Here are all the awards I've received. Here's all the grant funding I've received. It's almost the way I imagine it is if I were running for a pageant of most wonderful professor, I would use my CV to prove how accomplished I am. A resume, in the U.S. we call it a resume, and I think internet in other places in the world it's just called a CV, regardless. Um, a resume is not that. A resume is a marketing document. It's not me focused. It's you focused. You being your prospective employer. And so it's not about all the wonderful things you've done. It's about understanding what is the problem that that employer has, what is their pain point, and what do they get from you if they hire you. And so first of all, if it's 5 to 10 pages, they just don't have time. It's a burden to them. You've assigned them homework at this point that they don't have time to pursue, especially if you haven't given them a compelling reason to read it. Why would they read it? They don't even know you. They've never heard of you. And now you're asking them to essentially read an autobiography of you. Why would they do that? In a resume, if you do it effectively, usually for scientists, it can be up to 3 pages. There's this myth that it has to be 1 page. I think that's industry dependent and role dependent, but for scientists, generally it ends up being 2 to 3 pages. But the way that you use white space is so much different, and this is all marketing stuff. So you can't if somebody looks at your document and it's packed with words the way a grant is, right? If it's packed with words with tiny font and figures in here and everything's stacked up, emotionally they feel exhausted looking at it. It's this idea of cognitive burden. They go, I can't do that right now. If you use white space effectively, you can take 1 page of crammed information and turn it into 2 pages that someone will actually read. How you use fonts, how you use space, these things matter. But that's just like that's the aesthetic part of it. I don't want to give the impression that it's all aesthetics. It's not. The other part is how you're communicating. That 3-line or 3-sentence bullet point or paragraph that you've written in your CV, it's too much technical language, unnecessary level of detail. And what I often tell people to do, I say, hey, can you read out loud what you wrote for me? They'll read it out loud. And then I'll ask them, is that how you speak? They'll say no. I'll say, so tell me what you meant when you said that. They'll tell me what they meant. And I'll go, say that. Because for some reason, the way that we're trained to write is like the antithesis of getting to the point. It's like, just get to the point. Tell people what they get when they work with you. And you can usually break that down into like 1 sentence, 2 sentences. And of course, you have to explain, what did you do? How did you do it? Why did you do it? And you can get that down into 1 to 2 sentences. So it's about effective communication. It's also about putting things that are relevant, because it's not everything you've ever done. It's things that you've done that are relevant to the pain point that that person has as a prospective employer. And the way you understand what that pain point is by reading the job description, breaking it down and interpreting it. So imagine that you are selling something and they're your customer. If I were to sell you a car, I wouldn't say, "Hey, I spent 5 years making this car, designing it. Here's what all the components of the engine are. Here's how I made the engine. Here are all the other pieces there. Here's what some guy who drove the car one time said about me, about the car." You would just say, you wouldn't go into all these features of the car. What you would do is you'd ask and especially if that customer doesn't even want a car, maybe they want a truck. So you would ask the customer, "Hey, what are you looking for?" And they tell you, and then if you have that, you would say, "Oh, yeah, I have done this, or my car does do this. It can go this fast. Is that something you need?" And they go, "Yeah." And so you frame it that way, and it's about making that person's life easier. If you can come into an organization and position yourself as, "Hey, you guys have problems, I have solutions, I'm going to make your life easier," you're a much more attractive candidate than, "Hey, you guys have problems and I'm wonderful." Completely different approach.
How does one go about understanding that pain point that someone who's looking for new energy into their company? How do you understand? Is it just about reading the job description? Because to me, I feel it might be a little bit more than that. I know when I'm
Mhm.
researching, when I was applying to labs for PhDs, for a master's, for internships, the professor might list some things they would like, but then you kind of go to the lab website, the publications, you talk to the people from the lab, you talk to the alumni who are no longer tied to the lab, and you get a different picture of what that professor actually wants. Is it like that in the industry, or is it much more transparent? Can you read between the lines? And if you can, how do you do that? How does one understand those pain points?
I think your approach is spot on. There's more than one way to understand the pain point. Reading the job description and being able to deconstruct that is one way of doing that. It's a little bit of an art, takes some experience. I don't think I can teach it here now because it takes a lot of time and practice. But in my with my clients, I teach them that, and I also have a digital course that's self-paced. That there's an entire I think 3 lessons on it with several exercises and examples. But you're right that a lot of the time there are secret pain points that are not in the job description. And so the way that you understand what's really going on is you have to talk to people, you have to network with people, and you have to build a real relationship with them. And then once you do, you can ask them. The best thing you can do is ask them, if there's anything they wish they had or any major challenges they're facing before there's a job posted, because then you'll understand the company, you'll build those relationships, you can position yourself towards it, and then when that job is posted, they'll already be thinking of you. But you're right, you do very similar to what you're describing in academia. You do need to understand the history of the business in this case. What's the funding landscape? Did they just go through a bunch of layoffs? Who what does that business unit focus on? Because it's not as if you have I guess in the same way that a university doesn't have PIs all doing the same thing and talking to each other. Like, there are PIs you probably have never spoken to. Same way in industry, maybe not quite as isolated, but there might be if you're in the R&D space, there might be people in sales that you've never spoken to. And so for me to reach out to a salesperson and ask them about what R&D is doing and what their pain points are, they'll probably go, "I don't know. I've never talked to them." So it's important to speak to the right person and make sure that if you're going to be complimenting them or asking them about a particular product that you're a fan of that company makes, make sure that that person actually works on the product. I can't tell you how many times people, when I was at BioLegend and I was working like in the proteogenomics unit, people would reach out to me and tell me like how awesome the ELISAs that I designed were. And I was like, I didn't design the ELISAs. What are you talking about? They would assume that I did it. It would have been a different story if they would have said, "Hey, I love BioLegend's ELISAs. I use them all the time. Is that something you work on?" I'd say, "Oh no, but I know who does," and I'd send them over. But there's this assumption being made that because I was, the manager of operations and product development, that I developed every product, and it's like, no way. There's so many products. How could one person do that?